Welcome to Alternative Careers, One Degree, Plenty of Latitude, sponsored by the American Bar Association. Moderating the program today is Kathy Morris. Kathy is founder of Under Advisement Limited and former director of career counseling and placement for Northwestern University School of Law, former director of the ABA Career Resource Center and the Center for Continuing Legal Education. She has decades of experience with guiding law students, lawyers, and law firms, focusing on attorney training and professional development. Kathy, you may proceed with the program.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the program today. A happy, timely Valentine's Day to all. Joining me on this second Friday monthly career advice program today, we have two wonderful leaders in the field of alternative careers for you, and of course that's our focus. Cheryl Heisler is one of our veteran and preeminent legal career counselors in the field, and I like to say that Cheryl's career in a way found her. You see her short bio on the screen. There are longer bios in the materials you all receive. But Cheryl was a practicing lawyer at a significant firm and a successful one who decided to create herself an alternative role and then got so much publicity in the legal press for that she realized, she seized the opportunity that there were a lot of lawyers who were interested in not only changing jobs but the possibility of changing careers. So she created Lawternatives back in the 80s and has been helping people ever since. Marc Luber, on the other hand, who, by the way, to Cheryl and my regret, because we're in Chicago, comes to us from sunny L.A. today. He graduated law school in Kent, so we're all Chicago. We have a commonality. But this national and international program, it features Marc because he came to this, too, without practicing law, but with experience in business and in the music industry, something that's a pipe dream of a lot of people, but he made it real. And then he brought all his media experience to bear in creating this very cool company that we have an example of in our course materials. You'll see the video. JD Careers are out there. So I really want to thank these two. I'm so excited to be with you today. There are all kinds of ways we bring this career information to you, and every month I'm the moderator, but the more important thing is what we talk about. And we go through a faculty discussion, we have tips, we have questions. Please feel free to type yours in. We'll try to get as many as we can into the program. We have a section we call Agree, Disagree, where I throw out a thought and the faculty either agrees, disagrees, or maybe sometimes both, and tells us quickly why. We have some takeaways for you so you can think and do things after the program, and of course we like to feature and provide you additional ABA resources. Just so we know what we're talking about, there are all kinds of alternative careers. Some are squarely in legal organizations. They might be legal recruiting. They might be professional development or diversity roles in law firms. They might be law-related, of course, search firms, compliance jobs, e-discovery, sales, as you see there, or totally untraditional. I mean, people leave the law or choose not to practice law, but bring their skills forward to other walks, and we'll talk about all of this quickly while we cover our top issues. And I'm going to leave this slide on the screen while I say that there's a lot written about alternative careers. What can you do with a law degree is one of the seminal tomes, and there's just a new edition out on it recently. So there's a lot you can read and think about. So let me help you with that. I think starting with Cheryl, let me throw something out to you, Cheryl. If people are thinking about an alternative career, what do they need to do first? What do they need to do immediately? And whatever you tell us why. That's the first step. And also quickly, can you tell us how they might go about doing that? I know it's a tall order, but kick us off. Thanks.
Well, it's a tall order, and it's also easy. The very first step doesn't involve anybody else but yourself. You have to look inward and hold a mirror up to who you are, what you like, what's important to you. In other words, you have to do some self-assessment. If you don't do that first, you run the risk of running away from something but not running towards anything you really like. So whether you're young in your profession, even if you're just in law school, whether you've been out 25 years, you have to turn that mirror around and say, what am I looking for? What am I all about? Who am I? What's important to me? What are my values? Is it all about the money, or are there other things that really make life and work hang together for me. And some of the ways you can do that are as simple as taking out a piece of paper and making a pro-con list, bringing somebody who's known you for a lot of years into the mix, taking them out for a drink and say, hey, help me understand how you see me, what I'm all about. There are a myriad of self-help books out there that can give you exercises, and if you're patient, you can certainly work through those. But I find that talking it out is the easiest, fastest way to get to the truth, but you got to be candid. You cannot lie to yourself and hope that you're just going to fall into a situation that you're going to love.
Okay, well, thanks. That's a lot of good concrete information. It reminds me of one other way of possibly starting to put this mirror up to, what might interest you, and that I think I'll throw out to Marc. Marc, I don't often want people in traditional job searches to go do informational interviews because I like them to know what they want before they go out and kind of act like they don't even know what it is. But that might be different for the more untraditional alternative search. Can you tell us if you're a big proponent of these informational interviews as part of the puzzle that Cheryl started to talk about?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kathy. Hi, everybody. I definitely think that informational interviewing is essential. And here's why. When you're all exploring what to do with your law degree beyond practicing law, talking with other people will help you discover the many ways that a law background can be applied. And it'll help you envision yourself in one of those roles, and it'll help you to think about ways to break into that field, because that's the kind of feedback you'll get from your meetings. And also, you'll probably like this. Unlike a more traditional legal search, there'll be less of an expectation that you know all the answers before you ask the questions. So I say do lots of informational interviews. Meet with lots of people who have transitioned out of law and into jobs that might interest you. And, I think meeting in person and in their actual work environment is always better, because that way it's convenient for them, but also you get a sneak peek into the environment of what the work environment's really like in that field. But if you have to, talk to the people by phone or meet at a coffee shop. And when you're in the meeting, find out what they do, what it's really like, and what type of person and skill set fits the path best. And also make sure – go ahead.
I was going to
say –
yeah, go ahead.
I want to make sure people ask for referrals in these meetings, because you really want to ask people to refer you to additional people you could talk to who've made similar transitions out of law, because that way you'll keep growing the pool of people you can sit down with.
Yeah, I was just going to say we have an audience question, which I think that you're answering already. They ask for any advice for 25-year-plus lawyers who are looking to transition into another area. And all I want to say about that is, the longer you've been around, the bigger network you have, and the more you know people who will know people who do other things. So I think this really does fit everybody, but it also plays right into the strengths of a more senior lawyer as well. So
absolutely.
That said, you guys both talked about reading and thinking and talking to people, and let's say you do all that, and let's say you have a few ideas, or let's say it all sounds interesting. What's next in this process, Cheryl?
Well, first of all, I want to go a half step back and mention to the more senior lawyers who are listening, you've got extra years of life experience. You've got extra years of having honed both technical and transferable skills. You've got a wealth of personal information to draw on. I find that sometimes when I work with students just out of law school, as much as they are excited about possibilities, they don't even know yet where their strengths and interests really lie, because they haven't tried it out in the marketplace. So I sometimes think, even though it's harder or may seem harder to transition once you've been practicing for a while, you do have some extra information, self-awareness that you can draw on. In terms of what your next step is after you do the self-assessment, that's when, for me, the market assessment part of the process comes in. You've got to start to drill deeper into some of these areas and industries you've identified as being of interest to you. And by the way, you don't have to choose something just because you're credentialed in it. When you start to think about what you want, if you're a foodie, there may be opportunities in the food industry. I actually heard from one of my first clients yesterday. We haven't talked in a long time. He loved golf, and he managed to transition from a career in litigation to a career where he at first did some writing for Golf Magazine, tied in his litigation and presentation skills, and was on air for Golf Channel for a while, and has always followed his passion, which in his case was golf. It doesn't seem like a natural transition, but for him, taking what he loved and then applying his transferable skills to it made for a really wonderful career. That's true with any industry. If you totally don't know how to start, ask yourself, go back to that self-assessment and say, what do I like to do? What do I care about? What do I like to read about? And then when you dig deeper in those industries, you can start to find out what kinds of people are employed in what kind of various roles within that context.
Yeah, and what they read about in their arena, what fascinates them, just to keep making sure that the match seems, to be good between you and that possible alternative industry or avenue, right, Cheryl?
I love that idea. I call it active reading. You should, if you think you might want to be in an industry, pick up every publication you can get your hands on that people in that industry are reading and see if it holds your interest. If you pick up their trade publication and after the first article or two you go, it's not really me, that tells you volumes about whether or not you'd have the energy to put into a long-term career search for an alternative in that arena.
All right, thanks. I want to go quickly to a question, and I think, I'm seeing, a cluster of questions from more senior people, but I also have an interesting question that, people at all stages, if they're thinking about an alternative, how do they do this kind of search without having their employer, or more particularly their clients finding out they're interested in perhaps transitioning to an alternative area outside the practice? This can be a process, and people don't want to lose clients and billable hours and risk during the search. This is true in any search, but in an alternative search where you're talking widely to people, does that need to be a concern?
I actually think it's easier when you're not in your own industry. The problem is exactly the same as, when I'm looking for a new job, what if my current boss finds out? Won't I get in trouble? When you're talking to other people in the exact same industry in which you're already working, the chance of people knowing one another is a little bit greater. When you're going off into something that really you know nothing about, you just want to learn about, the chances of running into two people or running into someone you already work for is smaller. Plus the fact you're doing a lot of this over breakfast, over dinner, perhaps on the weekends. It's not necessarily during the business day where you have to take away from the kinds of things you have to do to keep your current business going.
Good. Mark, you have a thought on some of this?
I completely agree.
For the senior person?
Yeah, the senior person, like we said before, has a broader network and probably a better sense of what they bring to the table. So they should just start setting up those meetings and get out there, and they can talk about all their years of experience of of real life work that they have. I'm sorry, my phone's going haywire.
Well, let me jump in with another question here. Here's a really good question. The person says, "Hi, I'm 31, and I think they're in law school. I'd like to be an entrepreneur after law school. If I take 5 years trying to develop a business and it fails, will I still be able to get back into the legal profession?" That's a really good question for people at all stages. What do you guys think?
It's always. Go ahead, Mark. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think it's always easiest to first practice law. Then if you retreat from it, it's easier to get back into it. That's an honest answer. Having said that, if part of what you're doing as you set up your business is putting yourself in charge of the legal function, wearing the legal hat, that would at least give you something to talk about if you decide you want to go back into the traditional practice of law afterwards. So it kind of depends what role you're going to play for this entrepreneurial venture.
Mark, I'm sure you've seen it all.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. As a headhunter, the only issue there that I used to experience, though, was if someone's trying to come back to the big law world and they don't have a book of business and they've been away for a long time, that can be tricky. But I'm not sure if this person that's asking is looking to go back to the big law world or just the practice of law in general. It could be a little trickier if you're trying to get back into one of the big law firms.
All right, let me take a quick crack, and I'm going to dissent a little bit because I'm a little alternative on a lot of things. For the people who, like Mark, don't plan to practice law, you can do a good alternative search. You can get yourself something, and I have seen people, move back if they're in business or journalism or other endeavors, move back into law later in their career because they know how to present themselves and know how to conduct a good search. That's always going to be, a critical piece of the puzzle. So I want people to have hope that, we chose law because we felt that the law degree was versatile. We chose to get a law degree because we felt there were a lot of things we can do with it. And Cheryl, Mark, and I all know plenty of lawyers who have done those things, as we say, inside, outside, and around the law. That's exactly something Cheryl, really coined. And so we want to give you hope. What other? Let's transition quickly. We'll come back to some more questions, but let's change up the pace here and go to some quick tips. I think this will lead a lot of the people on the phone to feel that we're also addressing their questions. Cheryl, I think your first tip, if you could give us a couple comments, because I'm not sure. This is a serious endeavor, and people are sometimes worried about their career and their livelihood. So you've got this tip that says explore jobs you think might be fun.
Over all the years I've been counseling lawyers, it seems to me that the people who have the best success and end up in the best jobs are the ones who say, this is something that interests me. This is something that I would like to do. And because it's a very smart and highly functioning population, we can probably do a lot of things. Why don't we choose something that's going to give us something besides a financial remuneration? Have fun with what you do. It will help you stick out the search. It will help you want to learn more about that industry, and ultimately it will make going to work a whole lot more fun. That's not to say work doesn't always, no matter what you do, there's some downsides to it. That's why they call it work. But if you're in an arena that's fun for you, and remember, everybody's different. That's what do they say? That's what makes horse races. I've had clients who really like serious technical types of positions. I've also had people who really wanted to be in event planning or something like in the mixology world. So you have to find what it is that moves you. I sincerely believe that's a great place to start your search, because people ask the questions, even on the panel today. You see these questions popping up, what do I do? What do I do? You don't do the same thing that the guy in the next office does because you don't like the same things. So you have to start, it's part of this, to me, part of the self-assessment, and look at things that are fun.
Well, and I also think there's lots of research on the role of fun and creativity, productivity, enjoying your career. We lawyers, sometimes we're pretty buttoned down. We don't really read that literature or know that we don't need to take everything in a deadly serious way. We need to be right as often as possible. We need to give good advice. We need to be ethical. We don't always need to be so serious, and in fact, not being so can be an asset. I'm not saying go in and crack jokes in these informational and other interviews, but I am saying, think broadly, think widely. Don't just look for the answer. We see a lot of these questions. They're just looking for the answer. This is not a prediction. It's a process, and don't shy away from it. And that kind of gets to your second tip, Cheryl. Like, if you are looking for a different kind of career, what do you do with your resume?
One of the things that you have to take into account is you've done what you've done. So you can't change it up. People ask about leaving things off. You can't leave. I don't believe you can leave huge holes in the chronology of your resume, but I do think you can take what you've done and separate out what is a technical skill, i.e. something that is only valuable in a traditional legal role, and put it in terms of what I call a transferable skill. So if you go to the posting that I have for this webinar, I break down some of what you do in technical legal skills and how you could describe it in a transferable way. So that, for instance, if you do technical legal research and writing, those words are only meaningful in the legal profession. But if you realize that a good legal writer has to be able to organize their thoughts, be creative, write persuasively, synthesize and analyze large amounts of detail, then parse out the unnecessary points and meet deadlines, those skills are totally valuable in a wide realm of other industries, and that's how I might describe it, and just instead of just saying I research and write briefs.
I think that the handout you have that's up on these transferable skills, if people could look at that either during the program or at some time later, is really helpful, because I think it's just as it's hard for traditional lawyers students to think about what's alternative out there. It's hard for them to even see what their skills really have led to. And I always say, and there's an article I have up too, that for example, if you are in a writing career and there are deadlines and there's details and there's accuracy, those are all things that translate. Those are all things that people need, and it's not that they, are looking for a lawyer, but they might be looking for you, and that's what you have to carry into framing your resume and having confidence in the search. Mark, I think you're up. You have a couple of tips there. One's on how to present yourself in an alternative search, and one's on how not to. Where do you want to go with this?
Yeah, and first I just want to say how much I agree with what Cheryl said about finding the stuff that you enjoy, the stuff that's fun to you, the stuff that's interesting to you. That's so important, not just because it's what you're going to be doing every day, but also it'll help when you go to present yourself. Because, if you're chasing something that truly interests and excites you, the passions just kind of, come out of you in the meetings. It's going to make you more human. So, let me give you some tips. So when you're meeting with people, talk about how you'd be a fit in whatever alternative capacity you're exploring. And remember, the burden's on you to explain how your background's an asset for any position. Because the reality is that most non-JDs don't know the special transferable skill sets that law school and law practice helps you develop. So when talking about your law degree and law background during both informational interviews and job interviews, I think the best way to force yourself to explain what you bring to the table is to pretend the people you're meeting with are from Mars, in a respectful and non-condescending way, of course. And this way you won't risk glossing over why you'd excel in the position, because someone from Mars can't possibly know a thing about law school training or education or the special skills you bring to the table as a result of your background. And here's the thing, if you do gloss over this and you skip this step, non-JDs are likely to conclude that you're trained just to be a lawyer and that you're not a fit for what they do. So break the mold and make sure you do this. My next tip is avoid playing into the stereotypes of lawyers. So in your meetings, listen more than you speak. Don't perpetuate the stereotype that no one can get a word in when a lawyer's around. And drop all the legalese. Speak like a human with some warmth and creativity, not dryly like a legal document with words like albeit. Just like I was saying before, people connect when they meet with other human people. And you're going to come across as more human if you're chasing things that you're truly interested in. So surprise everybody in good ways. Don't play into stereotypes. And maybe even joke about it and say, hey, I hope you won't hold it against me that I'm a lawyer.
I have a couple questions here. Some people are having trouble finding that transferable skill grid of Cheryl's. It's on the career advice website. If you don't have, if you weren't sent that with your materials, and you can go to www.ambar.org/advice, and you'll see all the articles and video and all the cool things that we have in the resources. I'm getting also, some nitty-gritty questions like, can the resume be more than one page? How far do you go back? And we want to encourage people not to be in the box. That's the whole point of this looking alternatively. You don't have a 5-page resume, but if you have a prior career, yeah, sure, 2 pages. If you have things that are worthwhile to say, and the layout matters. So, kind of use your judgment on that. But a more serious issue, if you ask me, is there are people out there who've only you guys been able to get maybe temporary legal work, though they wanted to be in the law desperately. They love the law. They want to stay, but they're thinking, well, geez, maybe I'm not going to make a breakthrough. Maybe I should try something else. I mean, when is it sort of time? And also talking about time and money, can they make a living? They're worried that if they have student loans, if they go to something alternative, that they may not be able to make a comparable kind of living. Can you speak to those two things, kind of time and money?
Kathy, you're asking a bundle of questions there. One is, what about who wanted a legal job but couldn't find it because of the economy, and then ultimately does want to transition back into the law? I think that person is smarter to try to find something that is still a quasi-legal job that still has some kind of a nexus to the law, so that when things pick up, which hopefully they will, there's some predictions that say by 2016 we'll have enough jobs for all the lawyers that graduate. I don't know if that's the right number or not, but it's interesting to think about. But if you're going to want to transition back, you've got to have a story to tell in a year or in 2 years. So what you do now and the kind of role you play has to stay related and keep you abreast of what's happening in the law, connected to what lawyers do, still stay accredited, keep your association, your bar association, and other whatever you need to keep your status active. something else that you mentioned about doing a resume when you're looking either for non-traditional or something new, yes, you have to say the important things in your background, and yes, you have to slant it, but you also have to have done some research as to what a resume in this new industry looks like. If you go to an area where no resume is more than one page, then even if you've got a lot to say, you've got to make sure that your style fits. One of the quickest ways to be weeded out is if you send a resume that looks like a legal resume in an industry that doesn't use that kind of format. So you have to be savvy and do your homework before you figure out what's going to go in the resume for that new industry.
That's brilliant. That's really good. The idea of can you make as much money? There's somebody that writes in. He says, I'm writing a novel as a lawyer, but I need to make money in the interim. Most writing jobs are freelance and are not well paid. Any suggestions? And here's the thing. Yeah, there are a lot of jobs inside, outside, and around the law that aren't well paid. There are plenty of lawyers who are needing to make more money as lawyers. But if you are in writing, there are a lot of things to do looking for and then perhaps even creating jobs. Law firms, they pay nicely to have people inside of them who are writing coaches. They pay nicely to have people who, can teach the partners how to edit. They pay nicely for programs on writing, and you can make a lot of money in one day. There are people who do that with writing. There are the kind of things, you can do, but you might not know about, and that's why you have to dig deeper, like, Cheryl and Marc are telling us.
Even freelance lawyering. People can look into freelance lawyering opportunities. There could be some transactional work that's needed, and there are some firms that do freelance lawyering placement, and there might be opportunities for the writer who's asking this question to do some true legal writing for a small firm or maybe even large firm that needs that help but doesn't have someone on staff to do it.
Okay, guys. People are asking a lot of questions because there's a lot of concern here. There's a lot of interest and a lot of concern. So, Cheryl, you talked about not looking, not doing this because you're running away from something. How do you, if you're considering an alternative, will it just always appear that you ran off, that you were unsuccessful? And that's why, you guys, I started this program with the introduction of Marc and Cheryl as successful people. Inside the law, in alternative roles without practicing law. So, it's some of it's part of how you frame what you do, how you think about what you've done. But, any other words of wisdom before we move to the next part of the program on people who are really sort of afraid of considering an alternative or maybe really following through on this?
Kathy, you raised a great question, which is how do you define success? If success for you is to be a senior partner with your name on the door, then that may be the only way you get there. But if success for a different person is defined as having a well-balanced life and doing something they love and making a difference, perhaps having an intellectual and creative challenge and using their thinking skills, if that's your definition of success, there are a lot of other roles besides traditional practice that will get you there, which to me circles back to the self-assessment. You have to be very, very candid and say, this is not what my spouse wants for me. This is not what my parents want for me. What do I want for me? And if you can honestly, again, take out that mirror and say, I don't need to make X hundreds of thousands of dollars. I need to make a nice living, and I need to have time with my family. I need to do something creative, and I need to do something that's outdoors. What defines success for you is how I think you get to what the alternative career that makes you feel good about your work choice. That's what you're going for.
Yeah, and I liked your suggestion about trying to fit in. You guys have both been talking about fit and trying to find out what resumes in a certain industry look like, and that's part of the informational interview. Ask someone to see their resume. Got to get creative. There aren't answers in a book to every one of these questions we're getting, but you're creative lawyers. I think you got to open your minds even more to think about how you get yourself from point A to B to C and beyond. And people like Cheryl and Marc, those are people who make a living, as do I, helping people with that. We're not saying you got to come to that. A lot of people do this on their own, and we applaud that too. But I think that in terms of feeling that you're overqualified or people telling you you're overqualified, you need to think as you would for any interview questions about how you might respond to that. You might want to use words like flexible. I'm flexible on compensation. I've been frugal. Yeah, Mark, jump in.
I just want to chime in on that point of the fear that you were talking about before, because I literally just had a conversation with someone last week who I thought was a really sharp guy, young partner at a big firm on the East Coast, and he was saying how much he's interested in exploring this particular alternative career path, and he was really thinking of going for it, but what's holding him back is the fear that people will think he was a failure as a lawyer and that's why he's doing this. And so that's really stopping him from chasing what he's interested in. And I said to him, what would you rather do, have a job you enjoy every day or sit around worrying about what everyone else thinks about you? And that really resonated with him, and that's why I wanted to chime in and say it, because once he heard that, he was like, wow, I really will probably chase this now. He's like, I hadn't thought about it that way, which it's interesting, but so many lawyers are driven. Everyone's used to being the A student and used to kind of chasing that prestigious thing, used to thinking about, how does everyone look at me? And if you don't think about how you look at yourself and what excites you, then you could just sit worrying about everyone else all the time and not doing what really is going to make you happy.
Well, Mark, I just want to say I really relate to that. When I left Big Law to go to work at Kraft in marketing, which I loved, it was really fun. But for about the first 6 months, when people outside of work asked me what I did, I honestly would respond by saying, well, I used to practice law, but now and it wasn't until I realized it was my own insecurity. It was much more exciting to tell people I worked in marketing at Kraft or I worked on Parquet margarine or Kraft Real mayonnaise. They thought that was fun. Being a lawyer sounded sort of boring. But I needed that crutch. And I also understand how that gentleman that you spoke of was really having a hard time with it. Ultimately, you get past that, but it is something you need to give some thought to. If prestige drives you more than something else, maybe you're not ready to make the move. You've got to...
Well, or you can move to a prestigious alternative like you did. I mean, and there are plenty of people across the spectrum listening to us who wish that prestige was their issue. So here's one of our people wrote in. There's an excellent book called The 10 Laws of Career Reinvention by Pamela Mitchell, who she said answers many of the questions she's hearing during the presentation. So that would be great. Listen to us, do some research, talk to people, read. There's also a book called Do What You Love and the Money Will Follow. A lot of us make good money. Don't worry about the money. Worry about performing well and advancing. And speaking of advancing, I need to move on to a quick agree-disagree moment. Cheryl, if people hear about job titles, this could be interesting. Are the job titles telling? Talk about that. Do you agree, disagree, and quickly why?
I think it might be a hook to get you to learn more, but more often than not, they're misleading. You might think strategic planning sounds very exciting and important. It's a lot of number crunching, and you wouldn't know about it until you sat down and spoke with somebody who did that. One of the things that I like about informational interviews is at the very initial level, I think you've got to go into somebody who has a title and ask them what that title really means. What do they really do on a day-to-day basis? So you're not just picking something that sounds cool, but something that in truth would be cool for you to get up and do every day. You've got to be careful with the title.
Okay. Let's see. I skipped over Mark. How about agree, disagree, Mark? It's easy to get people to meet with you about an alternative search. People on the phone may be thinking, "Oh my gosh, how am I going to do this?" Do you agree or disagree that it's easy?
I definitely agree. Even though people might be busier than ever, it's actually also easier than ever to find people who will talk with you about what they do. You could always find people to meet with through your friends, your family, friends of friends. You can take advantage of your school's alumni office. But now, thanks to social media, we've also got Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, literally tons of people at our fingertips. So it's really easier than ever to find people to meet with you. So, yeah, I definitely agree with that.
All right, here's a cool question, something we really haven't talked about. We've all been to so much school, and somebody's asking, they're thinking about should they go back and get an MBA or should they get an MS so they can transition into other fields, time, money, et cetera. What do you think about going back to school?
I think that totally depends on the role, and I think that this is a perfect question to ask in informational interviewing. If you're meeting with lots of people who, let's say, Cheryl mentioned being a brand manager. So let's say you're thinking, I might want to be a brand manager, and you're meeting with people in marketing departments at companies throughout whatever city you're in. That's a question to ask them and say, hey, how many of the people on your team have, let's say, an MBA? And how important do you feel that MBA is to making someone a good candidate? And if I were to come and interview at a company like yours with my JD, would you take me seriously without another degree? How would I do as a candidate? And you could find out right then and there. The more people you talk to, the more opinions you'll get. And if everyone's saying, oh, yeah, you're not going to be able to get anywhere in this field without degree XYZ, then you're going to want it. But they might say, it's not necessary. Yeah, 30% of the people have it. Yes, it's helped them, but you've got your own thing that's going to help you. So I think that's what you do.
It depends, but somebody else asked, she's interested in a teaching position, but when she goes to look toward them, alternatively, they tell her you have to have university-level teaching experience. And so how do I approach this? Yeah, you might have to go back and get a certificate and do this and that and do this. But I also say you can get significant professional teaching experience, let's say in a law firm. There's a whole field of people who speak in law firms on skills issues, who work in professional development, and that's what they do, is they create curriculum, they teach, and then you transition sideways to a higher level role in a nonprofit or university, to teach. So we need you to be creative, again, about this. And somebody asked me to repeat the name of the book that I just mentioned, and it's Pamela Mitchell's book called The 10 Laws of Career Reinvention. You guys have any other books or suggestions before we move along?
I love to follow some of the blogs where people talk about what else lawyers can do. So there was a blog, Thrillable Hours. Just love the name. And it was started by a woman who was laid off in the downturn, and she went out and just found other lawyers doing other things. And that was cool. There's I think it's called Brazen, Brazen, about professionals who have done interesting things and career changes. And I happened to see an old article about a lawyer who was highly educated and decided to go first into business and then start her own business collecting up domain names. And she did something that she loved, and she loves being the expert on domain names. So it's random sometimes, but these stories are very motivational. And you find that they're all across the board because, in fact, lawyers are interesting people, and it goes back to doing something that personally is exciting for them. So books are great, and learning the steps are great, but watching people's stories evolve, that to me is even more fun.
Yeah, and that's what that's so cool, and that's what Marc does for a living, right, Marc? Talking to people about the evolution of career stories?
Yeah, I interview people on video who do different things with their law degrees, and they tell their story. They tell what the jobs are really like, so it's a virtual informational interview, but they also tell their story on what led them to that path, so yeah.
Okay, somebody asked me again for the website that provides the alternative career advice articles, www.ambar.org/advice. You'll find us, or you can Google Career Advice Live, American Bar. Okay, let's get to some of our thoughts on takeaways, things people need to do in addition to what we've talked about, but that they can continue to think about afterward. Let's see, whose tip is this? Be sensitive. Whose takeaway? Be sensitive to your audience.
That's mine. I'm going to go with my other one first before that.
Okay, that means we're going to.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So, before communicating with someone who represents an alternative path, you want to make a list of all the special skills that you personally bring to the table as a result of law school or practice or whatever your prior career was, and anything that would help you excel at the role that the person you're meeting with represents. And you want to study that list so that you can communicate it to anyone and everyone without seeming like you're reading from a script. It should just be a natural extension of who you are. And, let me give you some quick examples. So let's say you're looking at a sales-oriented role. You'd want to talk about your strengths in the areas of persuasive communication and your ability to boil down complex ideas into digestible bits and your ability to listen carefully, being detail-oriented, and having a work ethic that's trained for marathons and not just sprints so that you can stick with a long sales cycle. So I could tell you that as a headhunter, that was a very sales-oriented job, and I definitely feel, without a doubt, that my legal background was incredibly helpful in that world. If you're looking at a writing or journalism-oriented role, you'd be talking about your writing skills, your research skills. You get the point. So my final takeaway is that it's key when doing all this to be really sensitive to your audience. too many lawyers think it's persuasive to say that just because you're a lawyer, you're therefore smart and a fast learner, so you could basically do any job. And that's not really persuasive, and it could actually be mistaken as condescending by someone who might have a different degree or a different background and has worked hard to excel in their field. So be sensitive to that issue.
That's great advice for them to continue to think about. Cheryl, I think you have a couple of those types of thoughts as well.
Sure. Well, two takeaways I'd like to leave our audience with today, Kathy. One is that you might come up with something that you think is perfect. I, for instance, had a client said, I want to be a teacher. That's what she came in saying, help me do. But when we started to test that assumption, we found out she didn't really like students or children or young adults. She didn't really like presenting or teaching. She really didn't like the bureaucracy that went along with the school setting. So I finally called her on it, and she said, well, I want my summers off. There are other ways to get your summers off than going into a position which wouldn't have been fun for her or for any of the students she would have taught. So you have to keep asking yourself to refine and test your assumptions. I think the second takeaway that I'd leave you with is you've got to be nimble or flexible. You don't set your mind on saying this is the only course I have. You have to say, I'm interested in moving in this direction. And as I learn more and read more and talk to more people and get one tidbit from every meeting or reading you do, then allow yourself to kind of go with the flow. It may take you in unexpected places that are just wonderful, and if you hadn't opened up your mind to being flexible and being nimble, you would never have ended up in that ideal spot.
Well, this sort of takes us back, I think, to this where I first said we were going to focus on, sort of the 4 steps of this process. And, we've talked about the self-assessment and the market assessment and, talking to a lot of people and thinking about ways to sell yourself. Sometimes people, though, are still kind of at a loss. Somebody asked, can you suggest good online self-assessment tools, particularly free ones? We had a whole program earlier in the series on playing to your strengths. If you go to that ambar.org page I've been mentioning, there's some resources there about Strengths Finder, which is one of the online tools, and others were mentioned during that program, and they're free to members to listen to. So go back and look and see about some of the information we've already provided over time. And also when we ask you to stay on the site after we're done in a couple minutes and fill out an evaluation, we also now ask you what kind of topics you'd like us to focus on going forward. I know we haven't gotten to all your questions. Man, there are a lot of questions on this topic. We hope we've touched on, most of them in some ways. And we're going to use your questions and also your suggestions for, what we can focus on in future programs. I think, let me ask for, just a closing thought from both of you. I think you've been great. I really want to thank you. You guys are an amazing resource. You know a lot. You've seen a lot. You've done a lot. Cheryl, maybe somebody wants to know, oh, yeah, how can I get my summers off? I think everybody would want to know that. But a closing thought and some maybe throw out some things that you've seen people do that have made them very happy, that they thought were fun, that were an alternative, that they've really made over the hump of this process.
I think the biggest tip I would leave everyone with, and it goes back to self-assessment, is to be true to yourself. If you love horses, I had a client once who moved into a position where she used her writing skills to write grants for getting money to help horses that were endangered. That was just such a strange and unusual position, but it came from what she loved. I've had clients who found the funereal business interesting, so they wanted to find a role there. You can move into business. You can move into nonprofit. You can move into academics. You can move into the arts. You can move into hospitality. It's not limited by the law degree. It's only limited by how broadly you see yourself.
Mark?
And I'm on the exact same page as everything Cheryl just said. I hate to just copy it, but it's true. I mean, you've got to look in the mirror. You've got to chase what interests you. There's a guy that's an old friend of mine. He's someone that I interviewed as well about his path, and he did Habitat for Humanity for a year after law school, decided to volunteer, loved it so much that it set him on a whole new path of getting into the real estate development world, and he works in community development, which is a path people can chase. And it's often at big banks where you're giving loans to developers who are doing things like affordable housing, and the bank is getting tax credits in exchange for those loans. So, for financing those developments. And so there's just things that you may never have thought of that still incorporate your passions. So it's just a matter of exploring.
Your video that I commend to everyone online is about a guy who was a litigator who's now in crisis PR. So because, that is a fascinating concept. I'd never even heard of that field. So everybody have hope, have faith, look for more resources. We have them on our career advice webpage, which I'm showing you now, which I've referred to. I'm going to tell you that our next program is Building Your Book of Business, and you can register for that, as soon as this program is over. You can visit the Career Center website because there's lots of information there, so ambar.org/careers, and we encourage you to be part of this series as often as possible. We really thank all of you. Stay on the line, please, to help us with your evaluations. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Cheryl. We'll talk to you all again.
Thanks.